Good evening and happy Sunday to everybody who's listening. Just want to let you know that if you were interested in joining up with the Moby Dick Book Club, we will be having our first real meeting next week. Reading this week, we should be reading chapters 1 through 3, and the link to get into the book club Discord server is down there in the description for anybody who would still like to join. You still have a little bit of time to make it up and come on in and join us. It's actually, I think when people are forced to read it, they don't enjoy it very much. But when people read it because they want to, they have a chance of really appreciating, I think, the profound message that Herman Melville was was feeling out as he was hacking his way page after page and writing that book. So I had a bit of an exciting week. On Thursday, I flew to Minneapolis for a wedding of a couple that I prepared there, and a couple that in the time since they asked me to do their marriage prep, I think I could say that they're friends now, and they are people who are devoted to the traditional Latin Mass, and so we were able to arrange it so that they would not only have a traditional nuptial Mass in the Roman Rite, but that they were able to actually have a Missa Solemnis with that. So what does that mean? In basically any parish that you would have gone but to, we'll say back in the day, you would have had three levels of masses. You'd have the low mass, the high mass or the sung mass, and a solemn mass. The low mass is what it sounds like. It's kind of your quick and easy daily mass, just presided at with one priest. You could do it with one server. If you have a few more, that doesn't hurt anything, but one priest and one server, and everything's spoken at a low mass. You wouldn't ordinarily chant any of the readings for a low mass. You have a high mass. A high mass would be what you would most commonly find on a Sunday in any parish church, just about anywhere you would have gone where they're celebrating this. Again, it's just one priest, but you'd have a few more servers, and all of the prayers and readings would be chanted by the priest. At a high mass, you would also have the option of adding in incense all over the place. And the highest form is the solemn mass, and the solemn mass is a little more difficult to pull off because you need priests to be the main celebrant. You need somebody to serve as the deacon, and you need somebody to serve as a subdeacon. I think most commonly they would have, if they had a special occasion, they would have three priests doing that. In the extraordinary form of the mass, you can dress for a lower office and fulfill those functions, even if you're in a higher office. And so, in order to for this couple on Friday to do a solemn mass, we needed to find a couple of priests. So they did it at in a parish in just outside of Minneapolis, and they had arranged, even before I had talked to them, they had arranged with this priest to have their mass there. The grooms from South Dakota, the brides from Wisconsin. Twin Cities was a convenient middle place for everybody. Everybody was equally inconvenienced in getting to this wedding, although I might have come the farthest. I don't know. So the priest who was there at the parish, he was the main celebrant. It was real easy to get him in, and I came out and I served the role as the deacon. And I had a heck of a time finding somebody to serve as a subdeacon, but eventually a friend of mine from the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, was able to connect me with a permanent deacon who serves in that area and is actually quite good at those offices, which he's able to do, both deacon and the subdeacon offices. And so we were actually able to do it with the Missa Solemnis, but it was, about 10 days before the wedding, I was starting to wonder if I was going to be able to find a subdeacon at all. I had promised the couple that I would do that. And fortunately, my buddy came through. So that's a happy ending. And now, if you've been to Catholic weddings in the newer form, you are accustomed to, the procession happening at the beginning, doing all of the readings, hearing the priest preach, and then the wedding vows would happen after the homily. But in the extraordinary form of the Mass, the wedding vows all happen right at the very beginning, before Mass is even started. And so it's sort of like you just tack on the wedding right at the very beginning. And if that was all that there was, it'd be a little abrupt, I think. But they also this is a beautiful thing. It is also in the new Mass too. After you pray the Our Father, the priest turned around and gave a very long blessing to. Well, that's the interesting thing. In the new rite, it's to the couple, but in the old rite, it's a blessing of the bride specifically. So it's interesting how that changed with the liturgical revisions. And the custom that I had never seen before, but these people were retaining, was during the nuptial blessing, they actually had one of their friends, a married couple, both holding a veil over the heads of the bride and the groom while they were kneeling in front of the altar, which was quite beautiful symbolism. And then afterwards, we had a great big party for the reception. And so it was just a real delight to be able to do this. And I hope it was also delightful to hear me talk about it. But it was an awful lot of traveling on Thursday and Saturday, long time sitting in airports and train stations. So I'm not feeling terribly energetic at the moment, but we will keep moving on. So if there's anybody in the chat that has something to say, you just go ahead and post it there, and we can maybe open this mic up and talk a little bit, because I'm getting tired of talking to myself. The StreamYard link is there for anybody who wants to come in, and I thought that he might show up because he often does. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, fella. I'm I don't know, a little tired.
You too, huh? All right.
Yeah, I got wiped out, so I don't know. I got some trees done, so that's good, because we got lots of trees to get a tree in my driveway. So trying to get the tree out of the driveway and having chainsaw problems. But
oh, yeah, that's why you should just take Sunday as a day of rest, right?
True, but I didn't work much today, so I did.
Okay.
I did some cutting, and most of what's left over there was moving. And then if I move stuff, I'll be fine. But
all right,
yeah. Went to the dump, bought a chainsaw bar for the the electric chainsaw. Didn't do much today. A lot of resting. But I had to do some wood chopping. So.
All right. I tell you what, these summer classes go by really quickly, because we're already past the midterm, and the final will be in what? Final. Let me just pull up the calendar here. I think the final is going to be Thursday, the 27th of June.
What?
I started classes on May 31st, so yeah.
That's quick.
Yeah, it's when you do the same class 5 days a week, just moving right along. Maybe that's another reason why I'm tired.
Yeah, that'll do it. When are you leaving DC?
July 31st.
End of July again. Yeah.
Very end of July. That'll be after the last class, and I will be moving home. I've got a an Italian proficiency test on July 8th. I
Yep.
have been preparing for it. I just don't know how good I have to be. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I've been reading to practice. I've been reading the Vatican Daily Bulletin in Italian, in addition to Duolingo. It just makes me realize all the funny stuff that the Pope has to do. You know, like last week, the Pope visited the Italian Parliament, and an Italian loves putting things in the passive voice. It's like, and the Pope arrived, or oh gosh, well, it's just the way it's all constructed. Everything is in the passive voice, and it's just kind of makes it a pain to read. And when I'm Pope, I'll put it into the passive voice. Everything will be active.
Well, we gotta get over. We gotta get you over to one of Bruce's little ecumenical cigars and whiskey meetings there.
Yeah,
down the street. So,
I mean, Maryland is really not that big of a state, so I should be able to manage to get close enough where somebody can come and pick me up.
No, we'll do it. I'll drive.
Yeah, I'll get out of the city first. I'll take the Silver Line.
Oh
to
yeah,
the very
I'm not
end.
putting you up there again.
Yeah,
I'm going there again. Yeah, enough of that.
Let's see.
Getting out was bad too. I had
Yeah.
the convertible, and there's the homeless people, and I'm like, and I'm just jammed up in traffic on a Sunday, and I'm like, what? It's very strange.
Yeah.
No convention this year. I mean, last year's convention was awesome.
Yeah, no, that was a good time. But you know, in order to have these conventions, somebody's got to put them on, and nobody's planned a convention twice yet.
That's true. Well, I'm working on Thunder Bay Part 2, but you know, can only do so much.
Yeah. Fun fact: on both Thursday and Saturday, I did all three: planes, trains, and automobiles.
It's a great movie.
It is, and the groom offered to buy my plane ticket, and I thought that was a very generous offer, and I took him up on it. You know, he just got my information, but he bought the plane ticket out of Baltimore rather than Reagan in DC, which, like, the Baltimore, it says the Baltimore Washington Airport, so like easy mistake to make if you've never been here. So I had to figure out how trains work. And I did. I made it, you know, it all worked. It just made for very long days.
Yeah. Well, that was always the problem. I mean, people, when I lived in Boston, because I lived in town for years, you know, you get around by train and bus. You absolutely could, and subway and stuff. Absolutely, just take forever, you know. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, a lot of people are, you know, this thing, that thing. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? If you sit on a bus and read, or you sit on a bus and think, just quietly without a phone, amazing things happen. Right? You really get a sense for reality that you don't get when your nose is stuck in, you know, or even this is around and it's making noise, which reminds me I should make sure it doesn't. There we go. Usually I set the phone off long before I ever get online, but or even watch a video. Like you normally, when you come on, by the time you get on, I've got my phone on shut up mode.
Yeah. I got a lot of that this trip.
That's good. I mean, I think
although I did when I'm on a flight and they put that TV in front of me, I catch up with on movies that I missed.
I think that's reasonable, though. I don't, and flights are different anyway because
they're not quiet and they're not very thoughtful.
They're not quiet. They're not thoughtful. You're moving funny, and you kind of know it. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to on my way back from Minneapolis watch Top Gun Maverick, which I had missed that one when it came out. And it was I can't comment. It was great. Just part of me worries that it might be unrealistic. but
nope. No, it was right on the edge. It was
Yeah.
right on the edge of unrealism. It was
Yeah.
all plausible but highly unlikely, which was perfect. And I saw it in the theater, and in the theater, Tom Cruise comes on in the beginning and like says, "Hey guys, just want to thank you for coming to see the movie that we made. We put in a lot of time and effort, blah blah blah." And I was just like, I'm being respected as somebody who walked into a theater. Like, this is amazing. And I was like, wow, why did he do this? Like, I mean, I was so grateful. Like, I practically cried. It's like, no one's ever said thank you on the screen for coming to see a movie. This is great. Not that I've seen. Yeah, and like, near as I could tell, he meant every freaking word. So,
I mean, Top Gun really put him on the map, right?
Oh yeah, back in the day.
Yeah. So
that's the bomb movie, right, for him and Val Kilmer. And then what they did with Val Kilmer, given his illness and everything, I was just like, I don't know if you noticed, he got top billing.
Oh, I suppose he did in the credits, didn't he? Yeah.
Not Cruise.
Yeah.
Classy freaking move, man. This is how the world should be. This is proper exemplification of how the universe should operate when it's operating correctly. Not no rules, but appropriate exceptions to the rules, right? So that the rules are valid. The rules don't stand out if there's no exceptions, right? That's where the legalism comes in. Hey, nobody should ever. That's no good.
You know what? Like, I'm going to say like 30 to 40% of your work in a canon law. Now that I've been in the chancery for a year, like 40 to 40% is, does the bishop have the ability to give a dispensation on this?
Can we avoid this? Yeah.
Right. But it's like there's rules about what you can dispense and what you can't dispense, and a person has the authority to make the judgment call in a particular case. Does the rule make sense right now? Do we need to hold the line here, or would justice be better served by making an exception? Hollywood, apparently, whatever studio, I don't know whose idea this was to give Val Kilmer the top billing on Top Gun. It was probably Cruise, and
he did the whole thing. Yeah,
it's a classic move.
Controls that. Yeah.
I guess he was listed as a producer. He was
he owns the IP and everything. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Well, he's got a lot of pull anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. It was good. I also saw on the way out the Creator, which was okay. But it's got a problem, right? And here's a form of enchantment that I think people need to be aware of. In fiction, they can create artificial intelligence that's basically human. They could do that in fiction. It's really easy. You just create the character, you create data, you create R. Daniel Oliva, right? Or whatever your favorite robot character is, and people see it, kind of exemplified in fiction, and then they're telling interesting stories about it. How many rights should an android have? That's kind of an interesting question to play around with. It's like, should it just be the same as human rights? He has an on-off switch. Like, how does this work?
Right.
But if you're not careful, then you just kind of assume, well, that's how things work, and we'll be able to do that without realizing that they're just doing magic to. Yeah. So it's just a form of enchantment that all of you need to be aware of.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I've got plans for my enchantment video, so I think I can do it now. Now that I've been on vacation, I think I got it. I think I got it dialed in on how to do it. I'm just gonna sit down and spend the time. It takes a lot of effort. These things take a lot of work to break it all down and put it in language you people can understand. When it's something you see all the time that you've always seen and never had to explain to anybody, it's a lot of work to explain them.
Yeah, it's like
So,
trying to explain to a blind person what the color brown is like.
yeah, exactly. Or just trying to explain to anybody what the color brown is like without referencing the color. Like just
Yeah, yeah.
trying to propositionalize a feeling or a color or anything like that is really hard. But I mean, the AI stuff is really about the same thing as who do we treat as an NPC, and right, it's all about class at the end of the day. Who's better than me? Who's worse than me? And what do we do about that? Right? It's because it's really a fight against the legalism. Who's better human and worse human? Because the hierarchy is there, man. And if you don't want to put it in people, you'll put it in AI, or you'll put it in a video game, or you put right. It's still there, right? We're not dealing with it. So
Apparently,
yeah,
Peterson has a satanic communism.
there's a clip on the Mark of Wisdom Discord server where I think it's 12, 14 minutes. Yeah, it just, I'm going to say it again. At the end of the day, every time I have looked into one of these so-called philosophers or whatever, it turns out, and this is Karl Marx in this case, it turns out that their history tells you everything about them, and you can derive their philosophy from their trauma. In every
Well,
case.
yeah, obviously the story, like in Italian, history is
It's not true
literally.
for Socrates, and it's not true for Plato, and it's not true for Aristotle. But I think everyone after that, it's actually just 100% correlated.
Yeah, no. Literally, in Italian, history is just storia, right? They don't put any prefix on it. It's just, I don't know how closely that relates to our word story, but it sure seems pretty close. And obviously, what your starting principles are going to determine, if you're at all intelligent, going to determine what the outcomes are.
Yeah, that's why you have to pay attention to the outcomes first. Yeah. That's my middle out thinking. It's very dangerous to try to derive the world from what you know, going backwards and forwards. It's not going to work. It's never going to work.
Well, people try it, but it's really lame every time they do try it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Peterson's trying to get this particular scholar to say Karl Marx is a Satanist, and the guy falls back on but you didn't attend the official Satanic Church, which didn't exist at the time anyway. And Peterson kind of very politely ends up at, well, I think if you kill millions of people, you're a Satanist. Like, it's just yeah, probably, but like. The guy, so Karl Marx's father writes a letter to him when he's 18, and he says something to the effect of like, "Son, you're never going to bring happiness to anyone around you, and you're possessed by a demon. I don't know if it's a good demon or a bad demon. Like, at the end, it's a bad demon." It's like, why'd you add that in? But this is going to be a problem for you in your life. And I'm like, I can't imagine what it would take behavior-wise for your own father to write a letter like that to you.
But, I mean, he was like the poster child of a spoiled rich kid, right? And a drunk.
Who blew all the money? Who blew all his money?
Yeah, and a drunk.
Everybody misses this. Like, he was wealthy, and he spent it all irresponsibly. And then he was poor. Like, but you know what? He wasn't poor before he wrote his book. So he didn't know anything about it. He's writing about something he knows nothing about. That's a hint, by the way, in case you missed it. That's important. People writing about something they didn't experience is very important to notice.
Yeah.
He was never a worker. Never. I mean, it's amazing. People will argue with you about this. I'm like, all right, so like he had time to write a book, and he went to college in a time when no one went to college because he was working class. I'm a little confused. I don't.
They didn't have a whole lot of merit-based scholarships, and if you got one, it was probably because you were in the seminary and showed promise.
Well, but I mean, it's only post 1960 that people could go to college without being part of an elite class. I mean, even in the US, where it's most democratized in the history of the world, it's still only
It's like 40% of the population has a bachelor's degree, 25 has a master's, and like 5 has a doctorate. Did I hear those statistics? Did I just make them up? You have to decide that for yourself.
Yeah, but back in the day,
back in the day, it was way lower, right? It's like 10% of people had a bachelor's.
Right. And the thing is, like, part of that's the military program for education. This is all age of gnosis, where this knowledge suddenly becomes a quote value, which most certainly is not, at least not the propositional knowledge that everybody's actually using. Before that, it's like, no, bro, and nobody would write a book. Like, if you're working class, you're never going to write a book. You don't have time. Like, it's time to write a book doesn't exist. So. And he's raising a family and going to college and writing books. And what do you know about working class, bro? Like, zero. And everybody misses that, right? They just think, like, they put him in a modern context and make a bunch of assumptions about his life. And it turns out he was a scumbag. And people do this with Heidegger too. It's like, well, Heidegger had this great point. Heidegger had that great point. Heidegger became a Nazi. And because I know Nazism is evil, I assume that all of his philosophy is evil. And I don't engage with it because it's almost certainly leading to evil. Now, you can always argue, well, it's not all of it. And I'm going to be like, okay, bro, but like, logic with me here for a sec. If you could discern which parts were and weren't, you would have derived his philosophy, all the good parts, on your own already, so you don't need him. That wasn't hard, was it? So now you don't need to read Heidegger, no matter what. You just don't. And if you're not smart enough to derive it on your own, there's no way you can tell the good parts from the bad parts. So now you shouldn't read Heidegger, no matter what.
The other argument you could go with it, if it really was a robust philosophy that oriented people towards the good, it would have been strong enough to prevent him from becoming a Nazi.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, right. That's my point.
A great many people in Germany, a lot of them Catholics, had a spiritual bulwark that protected them against Nazism.
Right. Well, and Immanuel Kant and Rousseau and all of them. So far, every single one I look into, every single one. Not a coincidence when it's every single one. So what do we need these guys? And like, they can't, I don't know, they hit you with like thrownness. I'm like, oh, you were born in a time and a place, and we don't know that, we don't have any awareness that we had a choice about that. And you made up a fancy word for that concept. Good for you. Also, everybody already knew that. Like, I don't. Everybody's already experienced that who's born. I don't know why you need a word for it, but whatever, bro. Those people get dug down this rabbit hole. And what they're trying to do with philosophy, which the ancient Greeks never would have done, is resolve a religious question fundamentally. And then they call it metaphysics. And it's like, no, you're talking about religion. I know, we have those. Why don't we use the one that works? Instead of rebelling.
Yeah. Well, someday, Mark, Jesus will come back again, and all these will be fixed. What do we got going on here? I think Sally doesn't like our new time. I don't know, where is it? Yeah, the early time. That'll end at the end of July, and then everything will go back to normal. We're forcing West Coast refugee to come to grips with reality, so that's always good news.
It's a good thing he's not here in person, because then I could do it for real. I kill you.
Castle Adams says the other time's the only way he can attend. Delightful.
So there's going to be a battle between him and Sally. It's going to be epic.
Yeah. The prodigal son who wasn't prodigal. Oh, that was Marx. Yeah, he did leave home, obviously. Overproduction of elites plus resentment. Yeah, I've heard that theory about the overproduction of like they've created more academics than there are academic roles, and that's causing a problem in the university.
Well, it's this disconnection from reality, where people with a degree think they know something about farming, and I'm like, no.
Oh gosh.
So there's a famous thing in computer science actually, where if you go in and you ask a professor, what is it? Does it matter, which order you multiply numbers in, right? And it just turns out that under a bunch of conditions, it does, because one is faster than the other.
For computers
in a binary system, yeah.
Okay.
And they always go like, no, it doesn't make any difference at all. But actually, it does, because on a computer, it's slower one way than the other. It's like, what? Wait, right? And they don't. It is because they don't program. They're just teaching programming. It's not like that. Patterns everywhere. It's not just in farming. It's actually in all the things we also create entirely ourselves. Like digital computers and digital systems are entirely human creations. Mm-hmm. They're as far from reality as you can get. I mean, those are the things that create simulation. Literally, they're not the only things that create simulations, but they are the things that create the most immersive simulations. Are digital computers, and so like even there's a principle of those who are closer to the thing actually know about it, and those who aren't are just dumb and wrong, and they tend to spiral off into these. I mean, that's why the people who are with the people who are not doing AI, like not actually coding AIs in C, like I have, they go off in the woods, going to be spiritual and rewrite the Bible. It's not even.
Yeah.
It's not even close to being close to that. I don't even know where you're getting this from.
And see, the church in its current governance structure, which we got as a result of Vatican II, which I'm a big fan of, calls for certain major decisions that you have to consult certain groups of people. If you're going to alienate property of a certain amount of money, if you're going to erect or suppress a parish, some of these big things. There's that one of the councils that a bishop would need to consent or consult before erecting a parish is the presbyteral council. It's made up of a percentage of the priests of the diocese in various roles. So not just chancery rats like me, but you've also got the guys who are closer on the ground managing these things. He has to, most of the time, it's just consultation. And if he really wants to, he can, it's a merely consultative vote. He could ignore it, but he needs to have a very good reason why he's ignoring it if everybody's telling him not to do something. And then there's a few occasions that he would actually need their consent to do something. So that if they told him not to, it would be invalid under canon law. So, just at least with very large decisions, the law should provide opportunities for bishops to get in touch with reality if they're starting to spiral off out on their own. Because I tell you what, now that I have a full-time chancery job, I realize just how easy it is to make decisions that don't really connect on the ground.
Yeah.
It's actually really easy. And that explains so many problems for me. It doesn't make me feel any better, but at least I understand better now how some of these things can happen.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, right? Because that's the sort of postmodern top-down power from above narrative, where it's one guy making all the decisions, which never happened in history, by the way, with notable exceptions. Of course, you remember the exceptions, you have to, but almost never, right? And then that the point of Plato's Republic book 7 is the guys at the top have to be dragged to the bottom, and they get no accolades, no credit for making it better. None. They're almost killed. And that's actually the point of the cave. You got to remember, you try to educate the people you left and they kill you. That's in the allegory, guys. Don't do that. The whole process is painful, but also you can't do it because Plato says you can't. Everybody misses that part. This isn't possible. But it's to demonstrate that, yeah, the people headed to the good, true philosophers, they have to be dragged down to the bottom, and they're going to get rotten fruit and vegetables thrown at them when they make it better. When they make it, and everybody knows it's better, they're still going to get spat upon. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that's your role. But that's the proper distributed cognition. Right? The purpose of distributed cognition is not to make a bigger brain. Right? Vervaeke's get that backwards, and whoever, I forget the original author on that work. Like, because they're just more is better, quantity rules sort of people, right? Because they're sciencey people. They have to be to some extent. But it's actually to mix the classes, like to mix the perspectives. It has nothing to do with total brain power. That's a side effect. It's to mix the perspectives so that you know who you're hurting, right? You know that hurt is occurring, right? You know, you're not utopian because you know if I move one piece on the board, it affects the position of every other piece. Right? You move one piece on a chessboard and everything changes, right?
I'm aware. I didn't know me changing the time affected people that much. Yeah, no, and it's that perspective. That perspective is actually, that's a great point, Mark. I'm really glad you brought that up. How long have you been sitting on that one? That's that's pretty gold right there. Because
I will confess the following. I can't conceive that everybody hasn't already seen this. So I'm just throwing out all the stuff as I find it now, and just not even trying to break what you guys can't.
No,
you didn't make that connection. We all see the world differently. So I did do a video on this. Is that video out? I think that video's out. I got one more to kick out.
Yeah, no, it's really important. So when I was in college seminary, this was when all of this transgender stuff was starting to bubble up, right? 2011 to 2015, it was like the gay marriage and transgender stuff was starting to take the culture over, right? Steal the culture. You could use that term if you want. I don't think it'd be bad actually there.
That's correct.
And so I had to write this 20-page research thesis. I'm not sure I've made much of a contribution to the human body of knowledge, but it's an undergraduate thesis, so nobody cares. And so I really wanted to write on sexual differentiation. And I came across the work of Sister Prudence Allen, RSM, Religious Sisters of Mercy of Alma, Michigan. And she wrote this fantastic, like the history of woman. And I know that sounds like a bad title. Kids, it's really great because it goes through like every philosopher is like, what do they think about women? You know, and it's like, oh, some of them just kind of thought that human beings are just all the same, you know, and right. So we're just going to call that sexual Unitarianism. Some people tend to think that one of the sexes is greatly superior and the other one is inferior. That's Aristotle. Yep. Sorry to say, he had a certain inferiority built into it. Thomas Aquinas got infected with some of it, but was able to redeem a lot of it with grace. So he didn't get quite as low. Call that sex polarity or reverse polarity for the feminist twist on that. And then there was complementarianism where there's both the strengths. But anyway, she said that the most salient difference between men and women as aggregates, so we're not looking at individuals, we're just looking at the aggregates, is not their intellect, but it's the data that they are tending to consider.
Right. So that would in Vervaeke language, that'd be relevance realization.
Yeah.
So the relevance realization work that women do is different from relevance realization work that men do. Right. Yeah. And that has vastly different implications because And people do this all the time, especially now, right? They look at something and they go, well, Father Earth going to Canada Law School, so that must mean that he can, he's doing that because he can get up the power structure more quickly, right? And as if it's A, your decision, which it actually isn't,
Nope.
right? And B, that you think that way about the problem. Like he's definitely trying to be Pope tomorrow, and so he needs to go through Canada Law School to people, and people do that, and then so and men and women vastly different. They approach the same thing with vastly different perspectives, right? Because women are more oriented around sensitivity to weakness and how to make things safe, right? Whereas men are more oriented around what do I have to fight, right? Which is, everybody says competitiveness. It's not. It's what do I have to fight, right? Either for status or to protect the precious, right? Because women are supposed to be precious. They're not doing that, but they're supposed to. And they're also oriented around curiosity of danger, right? Of potential danger. Whereas women are like, hey, get me away from that. That might be a snake. I'm out of here. Men are like, snake? Let's check it out. Maybe it is a snake.
Okay, I think that one's a copperhead right there, isn't it? Those ones are poisonous.
Well, I wonder if I can catch it. I'm better than the copperhead. Oh, yeah, totally, right? Like, hold my beer. What do you think hold my beer is? Right, yeah. And those two things, I know we did a video on navigating patterns, right, about patriarchy is good. We kind of go over some of that. But then my latest navigating patterns video on the trick of socialism is all about that concept you mentioned earlier, right? This personal private perspective that we have, right? And it's like, we have to recognize that's not everybody else's perspective. The number of people that it's like, I have a YouTube channel. They're like, are you trying to get 1 million subscribers? I'm like, no. So it's not even on the list. It's not in the top 7 things that I'm interested in. My YouTube channel.
You're just happy that you have about 1,000, right?
Yeah, I'm happy I have over 1,000 for sure. But like, there's no my goal. There's nothing to do with my goal. Nothing. There's no overlap between number of subscribers and my actual goal for the channel. Goals, because there's more than one, right?
So if you had one really good video that took off, and it was the only video that was popular of yours, because you see accounts like this sometimes where they've got 400 subs and a video with 1 million views.
Yeah,
you'd be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, that'd be okay. I mean, I've got 3 videos over 1,000. Yeah, so one's got 1,400, I think, views on it, which is really.
Let me guess, it's got Peterson in the title, right?
That one might be the Peterson one, yeah.
Yeah, Peterson's fear is real.
Just the Peterson saying. One, the Sam Harris, and the Symbolic World Summit.
Yeah,
the Symbolic World Summit might be number 1 now. That one's still getting views. So.
Yeah. Oh, hey, we figured out how to get you to 1 million subs. Is you got to just debate destiny.
Yeah, I have a real problem with this word debate. Debate means something specific, and no one's using it correctly. Discuss, argue, but the problem is when you talk to Destiny, he just lies. Like, his whole magic tree, he just lies about everything that he tells you is actually just wrong. And you could look it up on the internet, and you'd find he's wrong. And no one challenges him, and this bothers me. I'm like, no. At 99.9% of the trick of these people like Sam Harris is they lie. That's it. It's that simple. They just lie. They just make something up, and they say something that isn't true, and they proceed from there, and people let them. And that's the problem that I have. You should not let them, because that's a form of enchantment. I know I got to get this enchantment video done someday. But like, the idea of laying, once somebody tells you a coherent story about something, you become enchanted by that story. And even if you don't believe it, it's still an enchantment. And so when you remove the basis or the starting point or all the things that the story rests on, people will not disbelieve the story. So if you let them complete the story, you've lost the battle. And you actually see that with Destiny all the time. Like, you just watch you see it with all of them actually, Vosh and Destiny and all these clowns. Like you watch their audience and they're like, oh yes, you're the best, you really stuffed it to the other guy, and then the other team is doing the same thing. And that's because one team cares about actual facts, right? And the other team only is enchanted by story. And like, I mean, we're all different, and some people are really enchanted by story, and all the facts in the world will not sway them. And the most fact-based person can be enchanted by a really good story. Like that happens all the time too, right? And so it's not a one-to-one, but that's why they dig in, because they're the group perspectives. Like if you follow Peterson, the odds that you care about truth and careful logic are really, really high. But if you follow Destiny, they're zero, because Destiny just never says anything true ever.
Now,
I've not caught him making a truthful statement yet, and I'm not joking. Like literally every fact that he relies on is just wrong. You can look it up; it's definitely wrong. He's relying on things that even the internet won't validate.
Yeah, the point I think it's useful to define the term enchantment again, and the way you define it is being opened up to possibility.
Yeah, well,
or to potential, to being opened up to potential. Right. Yeah. Sorry, wrong P word right there. And so I'm just trying to help digest for the audience what you're talking about there. It's possible to be so in love with something that could happen that you're unwilling to let it go, even if it's impossible, right? You'll see people when they're caught in a con man's game, right? Some kind of a pyramid scheme, some kind of an investment scheme. There's a name for the fallacy. I can't remember it. Somebody will put it, Matthew will put it in the chat, I think. It's so people get caught up in just what could be so much that they aren't able to settle down into the hard brass tacks of this isn't actually how it works.
Right.
So,
well, in the age of gnosis, we prefer complicated explanations over observation. Right. Simple observation tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Gosh, welcome back.
Hey, how's it going?
Somebody brandy new. All right.
All righty. I'm glad you were able to join us. You cut any good trees down lately, Josh?
Yeah, I got a job actually a little bit ago doing some line clearance. So I've been just doing a lot of climbing up in the mountains, clearing ponderosa pines away from power lines, but paying really good. So it's been good for the family.
I had 3 trees, dude. I needed you. I had to do it myself. I have to buy a $200 chainsaw and do it myself.
Yeah, that'll happen. You're lucky you got away with just $200.
$250. Well, it's what a nightmare, dude. We need to destroy the EPA because they're tightening down on chainsaws, so you can't adjust them. I'm like, this is not a climate issue. It's a chainsaw. Get over it. And you can't buy the tools to adjust the damn thing. And they hid the main screw to adjust the carburetor and everything. And I had to discover this myself because even the internet lied to me about that. So I was pretty upset.
Then you have to take a drywall screw, get it in there, and pull that plug out. Then you can actually adjust your own carburetor.
No, everything's accessible. It's just you can't buy the tool. You can't buy the tool. They're like unavailable. You can buy them on eBay, like in the darkest corner of eBay.
Yeah, gotta get the specialty tool off the dark web.
So are you telling me that iFixit doesn't sell chainsaw repair parts?
They don't sell the spline tools. I suspect that it's illegal because it's illegal for the companies to tell you what tool to buy, and you can't buy them in any of the stores.
Why do we need that kind of Castle Adams? Why do we need that kind of regulation on chainsaws?
Well, you don't. I mean, it's so unnecessary.
Oh my goodness!
And I didn't realize this because at first I was like, it's a 2-stroke. Like I can rebuild a 2-stroke. I was like, I'm gonna get out my Dremel and port this thing. and it's going to run twice as efficient. I was I'm gonna increase the efficiency of this by 30% if I have to pull the whole thing apart. And I took the whole back of it off after the 5th time of the damn thing, running for 20 minutes and then being unable to run for mysterious reasons. And then
my dad had the same thing.
There's a huge piece of rubber, and it's got a cutout in it for the main screw that is a normal Phillips head screw. And of course I didn't know it's huge. It's enormous. It fills up a bunch of cracks, right? And then you take that off, and that screw's accessible when the saw is put back together. And no one told me this. I'm like, well, had I known about that adjustment, that would have saved me some time 5 days ago when I started this stupid project. Oh yeah, I'm so angry.
You're still angry, Mark.
I can see it.
Oh no. I was like, I need the names and numbers of everybody that works at the EPA.
I
was like, I'm going to solve this problem the right way, the way we would in my neighborhood.
Your Honor, I didn't think he would follow through with it. All of you say that. Your Honor, I didn't think he would follow through with it.
So let's talk about it a little bit, because it kind of ties into what we were talking, or you guys were talking about earlier with my other thing about Karl Marx. So, like, how do we end up with these governments that overreach, like, all the way down to chainsaws? But a lot of the and I wouldn't say that America or the EPA is in any way inspired by Karl Marx, but a lot of times these super tight totalitarian regimes come from a very disorganized, very chaotic person, and so like there's multiple demons at work here.
It's simple-mindedness. It's literally simple. I mean, this is why I like Vervaeke's work, because there's a lot of hope in the distributed cognition. Because with distributed cognition, you can realize you're too stupid to understand this on your own, so you should cooperate with people. Of course, he puts it in opponent processing language, which just makes me insane, because it's the opposite of the conclusion that you would logically come to if you weren't possessed. Right? Like, you should be cooperating. And when you try to understand the world yourself, say you're Karl Marx and you grew up in a wealthy family, and I believe, I got to double check, but I believe this is one of those periods, because there were these periods in history where the wealthy class just loses its wealth, like on average, right? Like that happened at the end of the British Empire in England, right? They were all losing their wealth.
They ran out of credit.
Downton Abbey is about that time period in England. That's what's happening in Downton Abbey, right? The entire wealthy class, and what causes the decline of the wealthy class? Actually, honestly, the sinking of the Titanic might actually be the largest single proximal cause of the wealthy class. That's the way it's cast in Downton Abbey, actually. But that might not be wrong. Now, it could instead be technological change. That's certainly possible. Like, I'm not going to make a claim here because I don't know. But it's also possible that it's not, that it's actually just the sinking of the Titanic, because we lost so many great men on the boat, for real.
Right.
Like, that happened. And that caused a bunch of problems. Well, so you have Karl Marx growing up in what he might have been unlucky too, right? But he grew up in a very privileged elite family. And so again, he was never working class. He didn't know anything about it. And then, it's the let them eat cake thing, right? Marie Antoinette. It's like, well, we have plenty of, Marie Antoinette, to be fair to her, we have plenty of cake. Give them some cake. They don't need bread. Like, but they were like, no, bro, this is symbolic. We need bread for the next, year and a half. Cake today doesn't solve the problem, honey. That was a mismatch there. Like, we don't understand it that way, but that was the mismatch there. It was not the cake versus bread. It was more the cake today versus no. We need a steady supply of bread into the future. And the reason why you know that for sure is because it's women that are doing it, right? Because that's what women are really concerned about. Constant food supply for some reason. It's almost like they have to take care of small humans or something.
And men.
Yeah. Well, so that's the problem, and that's huge. The fact that they behead a woman is huge in the French Revolution.
So Josh is asking about how we got to the point where we are making it so you can't repair your own daggone chainsaw.
It's a simple way of looking at the world. So Karl Marx looks at the world in a very simple way. He sees it. He literally states that workers and managers and owners are all the same, like for real. Like those are this. Like any idiot can own a company. Any idiot can manage workers. Any idiot can be a worker. None of that is true.
Yeah,
none of it.
And so
Karl Marx couldn't be a worker at a factory. He killed himself in 4 seconds.
Is it because he's inside of a culture and he can't see out? Is he like in his own little matrix world and he can't see what it's actually like to be a worker? Is like
it's the limitation, Josh. Imagine, just imagine. I'm just going to give you a weird, fantastical situation. Imagine what you do for a living is cut down trees. How the hell are you going to understand how to program at the level where you can actually code something that handles 1 million transactions a minute?
Right.
Like that's just your limitation, right? And then when you come to my house, and how are you going to understand how I made that mistake and got the chainsaw stuck in the tree? You're going to be like, you retard. I knew better. The worst part is I knew better, and I slipped. Because I haven't cut down trees in the past 20 years, unfortunately. I just haven't been cutting down a lot of trees with chainsaws lately. So I was like, oh, I knew better than to do that. I got the saw stuck.
So what seems really relevant to me is having experiences where you actually encounter your limitations. Right. Now, I had this given to me because I really wanted to be a top level football player, right? And it's like, those of you who've met me know, I should be big enough to play high school football, it's a reasonable proposition. But as it turns out, I'm really clumsy and slow. And that made me mediocre at a small high school. And so I just, I had this experience of my own limitation. And now I'm in a profession where my best attributes are amplified, and my weaknesses are made up by others. So, but if you've never actually had this encounter with your own weakness, I'll just say it straightforwardly, having been humiliated by it, and if you just imagine that you'll be able to project your own brilliance out into the world, and everybody will just accept it and begin to clap for you. Then you become Karl Marx, and lots of people died because he had one gift, and that was convincing other people that he was right.
Well, it's not even convincing people are right. He had the gift of inflaming the passions.
That's kind of okay. So the reason I asked the question the way I did is the way that the Jordan and the other guy were talking about it, I don't know who he was, or I don't know anything about the other gentleman that was in the video, but the way they were talking about it was almost as if Karl Marx fell into a pattern. Like this can happen, and you're going to think you're the Messiah. And they were pointing to some of his writings as you can see it. Like this guy is he is drinking his own Kool-Aid. He is going so. But the reason I ask it is, why did Karl Marx get the people to start trying to follow him? So we were talking about, Mark, you were talking about the cave earlier. Karl Marx doesn't get anybody out of the cave either, but he actually gets people to follow him into another false light, and they burn themselves down or whatever.
He doesn't. Nobody follows Karl Marx anywhere. Everybody thinks he's a loser.
Okay.
Well, even in the short clip I saw, it's Engels who co-authors the Communist Manifesto. And the Communist Manifesto is not implemented by Engels or Marx. It's implemented by Trotsky and Lenin.
Okay. So there's multiple people with multiple different demons contributing to this. Because it made very clear in the Jordan Peterson video that they made it very clear, and I don't know much about Marx, so I'm taking a lot of what they got on hearsay, is that he was in league. He seemed to want to be in league with the devil, he wanted to be Like he seemed to like to tease with the idea of the destruction, like humanity is gross, or I don't know, something like that. Like it was.
Well, Josh, but let's take it this way, because I think this is where James Lindsay goes off the rails too. So if you listen to James Lindsay, and I love his work, and almost everything he says is bang on. So I'm not knocking Lindsay. I think he's great. I support him greatly on Twitter because I love what his message is. Communists always lie. It's his latest catchphrase. I'm like, that is correct. And this is easy, not hard. This is easy. They just lie. Right? He went off for a while ago, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, on this whole thing. And the videos, WTF is SEL. It's actually a great video. But what he starts talking about around that time is this thread, right, from this thinker to that thinker to Karl Marx to this person to that, you know what I mean? And so he draws this, historical thread, right? And I think that's actually an error, right? I think that's a conspiracy theory, basically. Not that I'm in the Pageau camp to some extent, not entirely, to some extent a conspiracy theory. The reason why it looks like these thinkers all have a thread of thought is because effectively they're all 3 years old and they've never matured. And so what happens is, I don't know how many 3-year-olds you've been around, but they all actually sound the same. There's a lot of overlap, no matter where they grew up. Like your cognitive limit is your cognitive limit at 3 years old. And Karl Marx has the cognitive limit of a 3-year-old for real. Like, I think that's actually the right way to think about it. And then what happens, because, and I know this because I've actually seen this happen. I've actually traced this before in individual people, people that I know as well as people I've read about, right? They will come to the same conclusions as Karl Marx very easily because it's just not that hard to do. You talk to a 3-year-old, he'll quote Marx. And I'm not joking. I've had 3 different 3-year-olds quote Karl Marx. They didn't read Karl Marx. I'm pretty sure about that, right? But they quote Karl Marx, right? They find the same pattern, right? They find the same equality and unfairness because if we're all equal, then the fact we have different things is unfair. Okay, but we're not all equal. So again, it starts with the lie. Then the logic works fine, right? You get logically enchanted by the fact that it fits together. Right? Of course, this explains why I don't have what I want. Right, or what Elon Musk has. Like, I don't know what Elon Musk has. Why not? I'm as smart as him. Whatever. Right, and then you can't tell anything. But you'll come to the same conclusions, and then someday somebody will go, "You sound a lot like, a Marxist," and they're like, "What's a Marxist?" And then they discover Karl Marx. But what happens is they go, "This smart guy who wrote a book. You didn't write a book. You came to the conclusion, but you didn't write a book." If I must be right. And all these other people think he's right too, even though, again, he had 0 followers, 0. Nobody followed his work.
Yeah. So what's the cure, or what's the response, the cure, or for a Christian when you run into like now that, like, because I used to not know very much about communism, and like I knew a little bit about it, and so I could try to attack it and be like, well, that's not going to work because it's like a scaling issue, like that's not going to scale. So you could attack it on that level, but there's multiple excuses that people are going to try to just throw it, and so that's not necessarily the greatest route to go with the argument. And then you could try like, well, it's obviously evil. Look at the people who inspired it, but there's some ways you could. I recently come across.
Use all of them. Use all of them. You just go down the list and go, yeah, this guy was twisted. He was wealthy. What does he know about it? Right? Like he was writing about something he didn't know anything about. Right?
Look at how many people died in Russia. Look at how many people died in China. Look at how many people died in Cambodia.
But the fact of the matter is that no one followed Marx because he died poor. Like if he had followers, he wouldn't have died poor.
Yeah.
No.
No. Are
you arguing with lots of communists these days up in the trees?
No. Well, so I live in Colorado. Colorado has gotten very, very liberal recently. More so than when I was a kid. Way more so than when I was a kid. Like I grew up in ranching country and everything like that. And now and so I see a lot of good people taking well, and not just with like, okay, so I tend to have a lot of people around me that are victims, in my opinion, and this is my opinion of them. That's probably a bad way to do that, but anyways, that they're kind of infected with bad thinking. Like because when I start trying to beat it up, like when I start attacking their thinking, like the responses I'm getting is like, whoa, like you reached for that? That was an obvious like it's kind of like when you start playing chess with somebody, like they'll make a dumb move when you pressure them, and like you just start moving your pieces faster, and all of a sudden they'll make a dumb move. They have plenty of time on the clock, but they feel the need anyway, so they'll make a dumb move. Then you realize you're like, okay, you don't actually know what you're doing, and when you press. One is my dad. Since I've converted to Catholicism, we've had many interactions with him still being a Protestant, and I see the same level of like denial of an obvious like for me, apostolic succession, like that's a really big thing. Like that really makes sense. Like we should listen to these guys. They've been doing it for a really long time, Dad. Like why are we still in the Protestant church as a family? And like why does it seem like you've gotten a little bit less passionate as you've gotten older? And I see now that it's more of a social group than it was ever a real, that the churches were more of a social group, and then it's waning.
I think it's useful, especially with these things, is to remember. So I'll give you an example. I got ordained with 3 other guys, right? Or 2 other guys. There was 3 of us total at our priestly ordination. And I know them very well. I was in seminary with them for years. We're still great friends. And at one point during the ordination ceremony, we had the altar right here, the bishop being the main celebrant of the Mass, and myself and the 2 other priests and another bishop who was there were all going to be concelebrating, right? We had 4 principal concelebrants, right? And in my head, I just immediately know what that's supposed to look like. You got the altar here, you got the bishop here, 2 on each side, right? And one of my friends, he was just standing right behind the bishop, and there was 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and one guy standing right behind the bishop, right? And I just, in that moment, I just had to be like, he has no idea. He literally cannot see it. It is invisible to him why this is incorrect. And so now he gets to go be a pastor in a small town, and I get to be the bishop's MC because I see these things and he doesn't.
Right.
So it's when somebody is operating on, well, we could put it logically, say they're operating on different starting principles, or we could put it maybe somewhat more narratively, they're living in a different story, right? Different good guys, different bad guys, different destination, all of that. What you're bringing in sounds like it doesn't logically cohere. It doesn't have a place in their set of first principles, or it's bad writing, and this isn't moving the plot forward. What do we need these daggone bishops for, right? We've got the Holy Spirit, we've got the Bible.
Well, that's the flattening of the world. But the thing that causes the flattening of the world, and this ties back to your original question, Josh, is if you are given the impression that, say, you can do anything, it's just flat out false, right? Or worse yet, that you can understand things, or we'll say a significant number of things, right, in the world, then you're going to run into problems because you're not going to have the humility, right? We talked about the humility earlier, right? Like you need to be humbled by not being able to live out your dreams or your fantasies in your head about being a pro football player. Then what happens is you start to construct or try to live in a construction in your head of the flat world or equality doctrine or even just a world that's understandable. That's conspiracy theory, right? Where, there's a reason why they're propping up the president that's, basically Weekend at Bernie's, right? It's like, it's really, they don't know they're doing that, right? They think they're doing something else. And so the game they see and the game you see are just different games. This is why the personal private perspective thing, a la my last video, is so important, right? Because you have a personal, private perspective, and to some extent, that limits you. And like I like this is why pragmatism is so useful. I never worry about other people's whys. I don't say like, why did they lie to me? You know, and not that I don't ever say that, right? But I don't try to resolve that. I don't try to figure out, did they lie because they don't know any better? Because that happens a lot. Ignorance. Did they lie because they're malicious? Because that happens too. I don't care because I'm a pragmatist and I see what I see. Like the world comes at me, and I don't need to worry about why that happened. Yeah. I need to deal with the fact that it happened, irrespective of the why. And there's a nuance there, but we're not doing that anymore, right? We're trying to
damage was caused by the lie or something.
Right, but we've been told that we can understand all of these things, all the backstory about an event, because science teaches us that, right? Science says, oh, you know, we know how the universe came to be. There was a big bang, right? And because they don't go back far enough, and then they run into trouble, all right? And then you know, oh, we can't actually derive the math for how the Earth came at this particular time and how it developed. But we could, if we wanted to, no, really honest, trust us. And by the way, this is how you should run a government. Wait a minute. You can't derive any of those things. You lied about your first principle because the Big Bang explains nothing. So, you know, but we like the explanation, right? And we've been given this tool, science. And the thing is, anybody can be given the science. And the trick is, of course, you're given the science from somebody else, right? Maybe this doctor or whatever in the federal government thinks he's the science all of a sudden, but he hands it down to you, and you think nothing of it.
It's usually an oversimplified model.
It's always an oversimplified model, right?
Yeah,
it's always a condescension. This is why I hate the word condescend, right? When you ask somebody, like if I were to ask Josh, hey, I have this tree problem, could you explain it to me? I'm asking him to condescend to me, literally. That's what I'm actually doing. And I have no problem with that. And if he's smart enough and talented enough and articulate enough, he'll be able to do that. And that's a great gift for him to have, and B, for him to give to me. And maybe he can't. And like, no bad, it doesn't mean he's a bad tree guy, right? Because like there's a ton of things, Father, you probably know this, that I cannot explain about computers that I know perfectly well. I can just do them, and you'd be like, what? Right? And other things too, but primarily computers. That's an easy one for me, right? I can't explain them. I just don't have the language. It's like you asked me earlier about the single perspective thing. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know anybody needed to hear it. I don't know how to explain these things. They're just like there. Like, why do you need to talk about them? You should. Don't you see them? Like, really?
I wonder if somebody's so we both attribute it, like you were talking about the president being weakened to Bernie, and like that person that's propping him up doesn't realize what they're actually doing. So we find again, would you classify that as simple-mindedness? Probably. Yes. But is a simple-mindedness is a person's level of blinder, like the level of their single perspective, is a level of their simple-mindedness / stupidness relative to that, meaning that like the more you're in, the more simple-minded you are, the bigger con you can find yourself a part of. Oh, yeah. Meaning like you're literally propping the president of the United States up as if he is capable of doing his own, and acting like nobody can tell what you're doing.
Exactly. Right. Well, because from their perspective, you can't tell because they've thought of everything, at least that they can think of. But thinking of everything that you can think of and thinking of everything is the same thing to you. Yeah. This is why when people went after the unknown unknowns thing, I was like, okay, everybody who does that is incapable of rational thought. Yeah. Technically speaking, I'm just telling you a technical fact. If you attack the idea of unknown unknowns, you are incapable of rational thought. Period. End of statement. Full stop.
You're also filled with hubris, and that seems to be coming up over and over again. This simple-mindedness that you're pointing out isn't coextensive with intelligence at all. In fact, it might actually be something
It's an
that
inverse correlation.
it's like an inverse correlation. Like if you're not that bright and you really know it, then you'll be a lot less likely to think that you can comprehend the world. There's just all this stuff that you really don't understand. Right. And so you don't try and project out there. You're just like, if I need to know something about church stuff, I'll go ask Father Eric. If I need to go know something about my computer, I'll ask Mark. About my trees, I'll ask Josh. And I'm sure Adam has something to share with us. I have no idea because he hasn't elbowed his way into this conversation yet. I'm afraid that when you got the three of us. No. When you got the three of us here, you do have to interrupt. So just to let you know, it's a Mark's from the Northeast. You know, he's used to just being interrupted and yelled at. I just wanted to get that out there. If you don't have anything to add, then
no, I do actually, but I'm enjoying the conversation too. You know, I enjoy your guys' live streams. I've kind of haunted your chat areas. You know, usually I'm late. My timing is usually not good, so I'm actually really glad about and I won't change the subject. I'll reel it back in. But just to kind of jump in, you know, I've been kind of haunting Mark's channel for like 6 to 8 months now or something, you know, commenting a month or two after he puts out a video, because I'll take some notes and then I'll chew on some ideas, but I'm also doing other stuff, and finally I'll be like, all right, I need to get rid of these notes. But I'm really happy to kind of come and participate. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think you know, I'll definitely contribute a little more. And I know that, you know, I can rattle off and talk for super long too, but I guess I'm so used to listening to you guys talk about stuff that I guess I kind of forget I was here. But for as far as what Josh was talking about with the difficulty of you know, you get deep into religion, you know, you're trying to, when I know there's a lot of different definitions, but when I think of the word religion, I think of like the virtue of religion, like rendering to God what is due to God, or, you know, and insofar as you do that, maybe, you know, it's like, oh, rendering what's due to your parents or something. And maybe it's like, oh, I owe this thing to my parents, and then I gave it to some random guy. You know, it's like, maybe that's your, you know, insofar as you can practice that virtue, or you are, or not, you know. But I think one of the things that came to mind when you mentioned, you know, it's so difficult to kind of reason your way in, and I put a comment on Mark's channel yesterday, which he responded to, about how I've never made any headway ever trying to logic my way into anyone's, you know, especially there were lots of times when I was like, I want to destroy this person's bad theological argument, and maybe I know I'm right, and, you know, or maybe it's pride, and I'm actually not totally right, or I have this idea that I can be the one that changes this person thing, you know, not realizing like, okay, it's actually not. But what came to mind was that thing that, you know, because I love it throughout history, there's always like clusters of saints, like they all, like a lot of them knew each other. And St. Ambrose talked to St. Monica and said, when her son was just going nuts, speak less to your son about God, because she was trying to argue him back into the faith, but speak to God more about your son. And or like her son was St. Augustine, and it's like that was back when he was, you know, struggling with chastity and all of these other things. And then you get, you know, this intellectual great, and what's funny is that this intellectual great was not argued into religion, even though he spent much of his time doing academic stuff. It was that aspect of just his mom prayed for him, and then he received the grace to kind of respond to that. And of course, he had to take that leap of actually cooperating with it. But you know, I think of him, and I think that even later in his career, like he was humbled when he was working on these great works, and he was trying to explain the Trinity insofar as he could. And there's a story that maybe Father Eric could probably tell better than I could about like his kind of being humbled as he was walking along the beach thinking about this stuff, and then, you know, eventually he kind of came to the grips of the fact that like, oh, actually you're not going to go and put that into propositions, like it's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And like you can kind of do the whole like, oh, what's under the sheet, you know, is it a motorcycle, is it a cat, you know, type of thing, and you can kind of do that, but you're not gonna get everything so locked in that the other person's going to be like, oh, wow, you gave me all this and I'm totally going to do everything I should be now. It's like, no. So.
Yeah, and you can, I mean, that mark of humility is all over Augustine's writings.
Yeah.
And it's because he just keeps on asking questions. He's like, oh, but there's this more thing that I don't quite understand. There's more to it, and he just keeps on going, right? He keeps on writing, he keeps on coming up with new questions because he's never satisfied with the praise he's given to God and the understanding he's come to, because the virtue of humility is a part of the virtue of temperance, whereby you are not overly delighted in your own excellence, but you delight in things that are outside of you. And by the time he gets to writing the Confessions, at least he's really grown in that virtue of humility, which is really hard for intellectuals.
And
the man had a hell of an intellect.
Yeah, you can kind of see that, right? It's part of the problem. One of the things I do, Josh, is I occasionally end discussions that come to clear logical loggerheads with the statement that, well, I hope that you're right and that I'm wrong. Otherwise, you're in a lot of trouble. And you would be surprised how often that ends the discussion, because by that point I just want to get out of the damn discussion. But B, opens people up. And it doesn't do it in the moment. Like, you'll never see it. They'll never admit it to you. But I know for a fact that that's worked. I don't know how often it's worked. And I don't care. I know it worked once. That's good enough for me. And you, if you want to see the inverse relationship between, we'll say, intelligence and this lack of humility, it's the Peterson Sam Harris debates. I think it was the third one, but I might be misremembering. Right in the beginning, I don't even think they had really sat down yet or whatever. And the comment was made about Sam Harris went up with the standard comment of, well, I could put as much into a cookbook as is in the Bible. I could symbolically interpret it, the same way. I could write a cookbook that was interpretable the way the Bible is.
Do it.
Right? Now, right. And now the obvious problem with that is that the Peterson in the moment was clearly like, sure, buddy, because he thought it was funny because it's absurd, right? But Sam did not think it was funny. He thought he was being serious. And they got dropped. And I was like, man, I would drill on that so hard. That's like, here we come, China. Like, I'll split the earth on that argument. That is a great one. Because there's no way he can win. Like, he can't win that argument. Like, why haven't you already? You'd make a lot of money. You'd be famous. You'd be known forever.
You would make people's lives better because you would be correcting the false doctrine that you are continually claiming is ruining everything.
On and on. I mean, there's 1,000 reasons why you would definitely do that if you thought you could. It's worse. You would definitely try to do that if you thought you had a chance in hell. So he knows unconsciously, and this is what bothers me about even Peterson's work. No one talks about this. Unconsciously, Sam Harris knows he's lying. There's no way he does not know he's lying, because he tried to do it and he doesn't. He'd at least try to do it, and he absolutely doesn't even come close to attempting the task, right? And so, but the problem is they let him get away with it. So his whole group says, yeah, that's true, and no one refuted it. So they know secretly that it's true. That's how people think. Oh, you didn't try to refute it because you knew, right? Not everybody thinks that way, but his crew does, for sure. And that's the problem, is that you don't want to get stuck in the propositional game unless you're really, 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 really good at it. In which case you want to have an out like I have. It's like, boy, I hope that both you're right and I'm wrong. Otherwise, you're in a lot of trouble, right? Because that way you demonstrate the humility to the person in the argument by acquiescing the argument. But also exemplifying and contrasting the consequences.
And you
don't have to be specific about it, right? It doesn't need to be specific.
There was, I caught Manuel Post's video that I commented on there, and I saw that your stream from Friday, it seemed like was kind of highlighting a lot of that video that he had done. And it was funny. I once again, because it was a longer talk, I listened to that over the course of a few days, and
Me too.
it's a little tough to do it in one sitting. Also, because it was actually comical how many times he politely said no over and over again to this guy who, again, I like, props to Gage. He maintained the discussion, and he was very amiable, and that was wonderful to watch. But just to kind of see, like, okay, they're agreeing to all of these things, and Manuel is saying no to a lot. And, and he did exactly as you were just saying. He left that opening where he was just like, don't take my word for it, bring it up to your priest. He might say yes or no, or, oh, it doesn't matter, or any of this stuff. But also, like, if you're on the other side of this line and you're not taking that step, like, you still have time to do it and everything, but also, like, it's maybe not good for you to stay on that side of the line if I'm right. And exactly. That's,
Yeah, he did a really good job in that particular talk. And that completely informed my talk. I think it took me 4 attempts to listen to that over several days, because I was just like, how does anybody get there? Because I'm always like, for me, it's just unfortunately, y'all are very fascinating. How did you get there? That's so interesting. How did you land at that? I must find out.
Okay, you got your head in between those bars. Why can't you get it out?
It is, and that was a fruitful conversation, because it really framed for me a lot of stuff to the Paul Vanderklay Burn Power conversation on the Anadromous channel. That was really interesting too. Not that I necessarily recommend it, but like the things they didn't hear that Peterson definitely talks about and stuff, I was just like blown away. Like, what? You've listened to all of Peterson, you've never heard him say this? Because he's definitely said this, or you're so close on this stuff, and then you just kind of go off into left field, for no reason. And in the Gage conversation was the same way with Manuel. He's just like very close, and then it just kind of breaks down into some rabbit hole, and it's good. It's good information to see how many different other perspectives there are on the world, and that was good for me to talk about. Really, I said opposition. It's really about rebellion, which is the same thing, right? You're constantly rebelling against authority, against structure, against hierarchy itself, which Peterson's right is older than trees, right? And Josh is like, I don't care if it's older than trees. I cut them down. There's no hierarchy. I'm flattening the world, man, with my chainsaw. So
hey, I do a lot more than just cut trees down. I actually am a certified arborist. I can prune trees. I can make your apple tree produce more fruit. I can do, I can do a lot of things. I don't just cut them down.
Yeah, but that was right there, Josh. Come on, right there.
No, I'm actually, in truth, I'm a lot more of a Lorax. If I could save a tree, I've lost a good amount of money talking myself out of. Nah, you don't want to cut that tree down.
Fair. But like, that's the thing. Like we are living in this time where everybody wants that flat world, and I've been thinking a lot about sort of the larger frames and the larger sort of time cycles, and we're very much in this time cycle where we've kind of democratized a bunch of stuff that maybe we shouldn't have democratized. And I think it was just earlier today, although since I've had a nap, which means my whole brain reset, I have to remember what it was. I came up with this little thesis that maybe one way to think about the problem that we have is that when you democratize education too much, right, you force people into a situation where they try to act as if the world is so flat. It doesn't have to be super flat, but they try to act, in such a way that the world is so flat that everything gets drawn into technology. Because, everybody talks about like technology's doing this to us. That obviously can't be true, by the way, just in case anybody's like not clear on this. It turns out we actually create the technology, not the other way around. And so it does not draw us in. Right now, you can argue that like Zuckerberg is drawing you into his implementation of a set of technologies, sure, whatever. That just makes him a bad person, by the way, if that's what you believe. But also, it's him and the people around him. It's not the technology doing that. That same technology is used for good purposes too, by the way. So
like
it's not
Sunday
the
night live
technology.
streams. Sunday night live streams. We're
Right,
using
Sunday
a
Night
lot
Live.
of the same infrastructure and technology. So
Yeah, I don't want to go into it, but almost exactly all the same stuff, by the way. Yes, a few more things here than there, we'll say. But that becomes the problem. Is that now we're thinking in terms of technology, right? Whereas before we were thinking in terms of personal connection and relationship, right? And that's sort of what contributes to the intimacy crisis, is that we're no longer thinking, we're thinking in terms of knowledge. Like this word epistemology drives me nuts. It's like, I know, why don't we never use that word again? Like that would be fantastic, because you don't even need that. Like no one ever had that before, and we're all here. So obviously not having that works fine. So why don't we drop the idea of thinking about thinking and thinking about knowledge and defining knowledge and all that nonsense, because we don't need it. And focus more on the personal relationships that we have, right? And focus more on what's around us, and maybe focus more on like which trees should we cut down and which trees should we not cut down, no matter how much money we're losing, right? Well, because that's actually more important. What's more important? So preserving the life of a tree or making an extra, $300? Like for me, it's preserving the life of the tree for sure. I love trees.
Well, no, and like anybody who gets into anything really works with anything for a significant amount of time, you gain a certain amount of respect for it, and you'll actually find like a lot of the forests were reseeded by the loggers who clear cut them down. A lot of that happened by Weyerhaeuser and whatnot.
Right.
But I think about this a lot, and you probably do too, Mark, is like, what's the best way forward? How do we get the most amount of people thinking correctly so that we can actually make progress, not just talk about progress, but actually, how do we get the most amount of people to stop listening to bad ideas and start listening to good ideas? They're both in plentiful supply.
Yeah, they need to know the difference. And right now, it's just clear to me that people don't.
I'm not entirely sure because the reason I say is because I don't know that you can educate that down to that level. The reason I say is that Christ still had to. He couldn't just be right. He also made himself charismatic. It seems people wanted to. Seem to want to follow him. Is that if it wasn't necessary to be charismatic, I don't know that would be one of the hallmarks of both of our horrible leaders in the past and a lot of our good leaders in the past.
Right, but Josh,
that seems to be part of it.
Yeah, think of it this way: charisma is inevitable because it's just part of the world, right? Like you're not getting rid of it. So the difference between a good charismatic leader and a bad charismatic leader is the knowledge that leader has of good and evil, and that's the only difference. Like all the other possible differences are irrelevant. They're not relevant to the question.
Can we say that our best leaders are those who have contemplated the nature of good and evil the most, meaning that they've actually looked at these two things the most? Like, okay.
No, I mean that's not even how it operated, 100 years ago. Like 100 years ago, you were trained in virtue still, right? Like the knights of old, like King Arthur. This is the story of King Arthur. Like the elites were trained. They were taught this is good, this is bad. They didn't think about it. They weren't encouraged to think about it. And if they thought about it, they were told not to because you're not smart enough. Like that's a church thing. Leave it alone. Ooh, that's actually the history up until extremely recently, right? All scholarship came from the church, all of it. All education came from the church, all of it, 100% until very, very recently. And to some extent, for all the awesomeness that is the United States, we broke that. We did that. And we weren't the only ones or the first ones to do it, but like we were the successful ones that did it. Now, all the little colleges and universities that broke off from the Catholics or whatever as a result of the Protestant Reformation or whatever else happened. I don't know the whole history of that. Aren't relevant. What's relevant is that when we did it, everything we did here worked. But that's a side effect, most likely, of the size of our country and the stuff we had in it physically, right?
Yeah.
And right. And additionally, the great men at time and place that had the opportunity as a result of the beheading of the English king, right? And it didn't happen right away, right? But it happened. Like, we're the middle revolution of the three. There's the English Revolution, there's the American Revolution, there's the French Revolution. Only one of them worked. That's ours. The other two were catastrophes. They weren't bad. They were catastrophes for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Except ours. Ours was great for the world, at least in the short term.
And I find even certain bad ideas, okay, for me, I'm not in any way a anti-American person at all, but I was raised with a certain image in my head of what America was. That inspired me so much that, and I was raised in a bit of a bubble, I'll be completely honest, small town and all that. It inspired me so much that at 17 in 2004, I was ready to join the U.S. infantry. I was ready to sign on the dotted line, and I really did attempt to do that. I got very sick. I was not a good soldier, and a lot of things went wrong. But that's the other side of the story. But I was willing to do that and actually try. And what I found out 24 years later or 23 years later after 2001 when we got hit in 9/11, that many of the things that we were told were not true. Many of the intentions and motivations of what we were doing, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, were not true. And a lot of people died, and a huge, huge, huge amount of money got spent. And so that made me wary of my patriotism, basically, and how I like that it made me wary of what patriotism or what probably could be attributed to simple-mindedness or whatever can get you. I could have gone, like Josh, you could have signed up and gone somewhere and died for something that you're basically signing up under false pretenses. Is that I remember the day that Colin Powell went to the UN and told us that weapons of mass destruction were in Iraq. I joined because one of the reasons I joined is because I watched that man, and my father respected that man and told me that he's somebody that we could trust.
Right, but there's two problems with that, and I do have a video on this. There were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's just a mess, right? But the lie was about the nuclear material. But that was a lie that was told by France and England first, not by us. That's important. That's really important.
No,
it wasn't the
there
US.
could have been bad intel. There definitely could have been bad intel, but there was other things going on too.
Right, but what if none of that matters at all? And I have two examples of this actually. What if none of that matters? Because what if you don't go into Vietnam and the communist contagion actually spreads? Because it's happened in Vietnam. Like this exact pattern that you're talking about with Afghanistan and the Twin Towers happened with Vietnam already. It already happened. Same thing happened, right? They were like, oh, this is a bad war. We were lied to. And the people that said we were lied to said ridiculous things like we lost the Tet Offensive, which didn't happen. It was the opposite was true, right? And so, but what if breaking the back of the patriotism is the bad thing? And even if the quote patriotism or whatever is wrong, it's not wrong. But because that's the story of World War II. Because if you ask somebody who was born after World War II ended, why we went into World War II, it was to stop the Nazis from killing the Jews, for sure. Absolutely. It definitely was not. At no point was that. But literally no point. Because we were already well into Germany. And although there was, I think it's a famous brothers that escaped and told the truth about the camps to the rest of the world, that no one believed them. Well, that's important to know. No one believed them. A handful here and there. But also, like, we didn't have any real intel that was actually happening until we got there. And we didn't get there until we had already fought our way into Germany. Obviously. And therefore, that didn't happen that way. That's the way we tell the story now, and that's a flat out lie. It's just a complete lie. It's
what I'm
obvious lie, right?
Well, unless you educate yourself on a certain level, you don't get past the lies. You don't get past, like, unless you actually critically think, and it takes a particular type of person to critically think.
But you can't, Josh. You can't. That's the problem.
No, I don't disagree, right. And that's what, like I said, looking back at something.
But let me link this importantly back to fairy tales, because that's actually what we're talking about without realizing it, right?
Yeah.
The details of the fairy tale are actually not important, because the fairy tale tells the story of a pattern, and that pattern has a poetic to it that allows you access at different points to understand different lessons at different times of your life, even though the story, or the version of the story you've heard, hasn't changed one word. Now, it can change one word, and that doesn't affect the fact that you can find new things in it, which is even more interesting. So you can hear 3 versions of the same fairy tale at different times of your life and get different things out of it, or you can hear the same version and get those same different things out of it. So the quote details of the story, or the precision and accuracy, those are 2 sciencey things, by the way, which I'm not a fan of anymore, or at least need to be used carefully. Those are the things that are deceiving, right? Because what level, like is it okay that they had illegal silkworm missiles in Iraq? There were, I mean, those are definitely weapons of mass destruction, right? And what about the chemical weapons that went to Syria, that Syria used on their own people? So we know they were there. We know that we saw the trucks. They were actually on TV, right? We know where the trucks went. We know they had chemical weapons. We know they were in Iraq. We know who developed them in Iraq, right? We know all this, right? And so you've got the Scud missiles. Nobody disputes that. We've got the Chinese silkworm missile.
Correct, but the anthrax that we were told, the mobile anthrax manufacturing facilities that they showed aerial photos of, we never found any evidence of that.
They weren't right about all of it, but they weren't right about weapons of mass destruction. It's just that, so they had a list of 12 weapons of mass destruction, and 10 of them we found, and 2 of them weren't real.
And
okay.
I think an important thing, maybe if we had gone in there, taken all the weapons of mass destruction and told Saddam Hussein, don't do this again. We've done this before. We'll come in 10 years later and do it again. The story might have been different, but there was another myth that was concocted. And that was the idea that we can just educate these folks into being able to run a democracy. Not like a United States, we did a parliamentarian system, but a representative Republican form of government isn't necessarily natural to everybody. We as Americans, we have a lot of formation towards voting and representation and how we do things here. And you know what? Maybe there's just something about folks in Iraq where they just want a strong man to keep the peace.
Right. Well, and maybe they need that culturally, but way more importantly, and this is the one thing I point out in my video, you cannot understand the second Iraq war without understanding the first one. And the fact is, you don't need weapons of mass destruction. They already broke the treaty. They were already under a war treaty from the first war that they already violated 6 ways to Sunday. Not 1 or 2 or 3 ways either. Like half a dozen different violations. So there was the fact that the leadership got whipped up, and they did. I mean, I've got my criticisms of George W. Bush for sure on a bunch of things, not just that. He could have stopped the housing crisis and he didn't, right? They got whipped up and they found a way into the war. And you can argue they wanted the war. Well, yeah, they violated the treaty. Of course they wanted the war. And to some extent, the Middle East is entirely our fault because of after World War I, which is an even longer story, right? But it's all this middle out thinking. It's like the war was justified. The fact that you could make an argument, which is not a correct argument, that weapons of mass destruction was the wrong justification for the war is irrelevant. The war was still justified. It doesn't. The details of the justification aren't actually relevant to the fact that the war needed to happen. because the war did need to happen.
I like I said, on this side of my life, since my converting to Catholicism and things like that, I don't know. Like, I got a daughter, and like sometimes I try to figure out what to teach her about certain things. Because like, right, okay, so take Russia, Ukraine. She literally asked me, like, my little 9-year-old daughter, what is going on with Russia, Ukraine? Why is everybody so mad at or like this guy Putin, and that, and like, so I broke it down the best way I could. But then you get to the question of like, when the just war, and like trying to explain that or whatever. And I was struggling. I was reaching for Jordan Peterson in my head. I was reaching for all these, and you know what I came back to? And the best thing I could come up with is something that was taught to me when I was like, I don't know, it was like I was about her age, and it was WWJD, and that's what would Jesus do? Now that seems really, really like silly, something stupid. But that was the best thing that I could come up with, because when you're looking at certain questions about like just like war, like warfare, like what do we do? And like there's the obvious question, we should do that, whatever Jesus would do. But then we have some disconnect with that, whatever that answer would be, because we're like, well, that obviously wouldn't work in reality.
But the problem with that is you're not Jesus, and you don't necessarily know what.
See, now that's what my brother used to say, because that's an obvious response. That's an obvious response. I've gotten that response.
The gospel's full of contradictions because of that. Like, that's the purpose. It's to teach you the pattern, right? And the formation, particularly of children, is all about what to pay attention to and what not to, not justifying things. It's what don't pay attention to Ukraine. Why? It's halfway across the world. It's never going to affect you in a meaningful fashion. Pay attention to refugees of war, any war, but don't pay attention to Ukraine.
It does affect her to a degree, though, Mark, and because our world is now connected, one, through technology. So she knows that there's a Russian ship that's off the coast of Florida where her grandparents live. Okay. And so it is affecting her. And so your world, just because it's happening on the other side of the world, it actually is happening somewhat, because now I'm aware of it.
All right, but everything is always happening in the world, and the world has always been connected, always, right?
Correct, but I wasn't always aware of it.
Nothing you can do about almost any of it. And so the formation is focusing you in on changing the things you can change and not worrying about the things you can't. That's the formation.
That reminds me a lot of also that video that Manuel put out. Early on in the first half, he talks about, there's this kind of talk about, hypothetically, if there was a war on the border of your country and another country, and on that border that was being contested, there was a farm, and that's where you got your produce and stuff. And it's like, there's this whole thing of, do you need to know about the war and who's involved and who's doing what? It's like, you just need to know where to get lettuce now. Like, that's pretty much, it's like, where is the bread coming from? And, and it's like, yeah, all the other stuff sucks, but also it seems to me that you could have some major world changing event, like the fall of Rome or whatever, but the people who were just living in houses and farming and doing their stuff seem to get on more or less fine, unless the battle happened on their house.
Exactly.
Most of the people in the countryside seem to just kind of weather it.
Yeah, knowing about it isn't going to change it. And that's actually the failure of the age of gnosis, where everybody wants to know about things, but you can know about things all day long and not be able to change them. And the fact that there are vanishingly small but important exceptions to that, or seem to be, because some of them are illusions, fools us into thinking that we can do that all the time. Like, if I just knew ahead of time, right? Like, I know this argument's been made to me. Well, and people have posed the question, well, Mark, would you have fought for 5 years to keep your $500,000 house if you knew you were going to lose the lawsuit? And I say, absolutely, I would have fought for the house. And they go, but it cost you $50,000. And I'm like, well, A, you're bad at math, because that's 10% of the value of the asset. And also it's cheaper than paying the mortgage for 5 years. It's actually a good financial deal. It's not a $50,000 loss. It's actually not. But they don't know that because they didn't do the math, right? They just assume 50,000 over 5 years is $10,000 a year. I was paying slightly more than that in mortgage anyway. So I was still living in the house the whole time I had the lawsuit. So no, even financially, it was a good decision to fight for 5 years, even though I lost, right? And also, you could have known you were going to lose. And also, you stood up for your principles, which for me would have been worth $100,000. So there you go. Like, I wasn't concerned with the money, right? And so the formation is teaching what to pay attention to. Do you pay attention to the fact that some large machine at the federal level is hell-bent on saving the European? You got to remember, Josh, I knew all this when it happened. Before the lawsuit happened, I knew about this. And then when the foreclosure came for my house, boy, did I know a lot about it. And now I'm an expert on 2008 housing crisis. I can tell you that. I have hundreds and hundreds of hours of research on actual law cases and stuff. And you learn new stuff every day, and The Big Short's fairly accurate, but not entirely, right? But like I still did what I did, knowing that it was a David and Goliath chance, because the U.S. government was hiding the fact that they lied to a bunch of Europeans and giving Europeans money, my tax dollars, by the way, and your tax dollars, by the way, that they didn't deserve, because they were part of a scam. For real. And I can prove all that. Like, it's been proven by others, but like, I can give you the goods. I can point you to that, right? And I still did the lawsuit, and I actually knew all that. Only 3 or 4 months into the lawsuit, that was abundantly clear to me. Like, I knew all that ahead of time. I wouldn't change it. I did it then. I'd do it today. I'll do it again and again and again. That's what's important, right? This other stuff isn't important.
Mm.
That's formation. What to attend to is formation. What do you attend to? You don't attend to the things you don't have any control over. You accept those things. You submit to them. That's what you do, because you don't have any control. The thing you need to attend to is when to fight and when to submit. That's what you need to attend to. That's the message. That's the message everywhere. That's the message of fairy tales. Fairy tales are all about attention, right? You should have paid attention to the fact that the house was made of candy. Right? You should have paid attention to the fact that your grandma looked like a wolf. Right? You should have. There's all these. It's all about attention. It's training attention. Because Jonathan Pageau's perfectly correct. The world is attention. That's what matters. That's what the formation is. Not only for children but for other humans. Like, you need to get them to attend to the right things.
No, and I think that's I have a lot of conversations with people who are like kind of like spiritual, but they're not, like, I don't know, they do a lot of yoga, they smoke a lot of dope, and do a lot of shrooms and everything like that. And so, which I mean, people can say whatever they want about marijuana and shrooms, but I mean, both are legal here in Colorado now, so they're it's just part of life. But no, I mean, it is. It's just, it's the same way that, people, after Prohibition, it got integrated, or, it's just something that we deal with. It's not a big deal to us, but at the same time, like, I see the effect of. But anyways, back to what I was trying to say is that conversations about anything Christian, spiritual, good, like nature of good, bad, or anything like that, they're actually, I'm finding in my life, they're easier to have with these people than they are to have with, like, my own dad, who's a Christian, who's a lifelong Christian.
Sure.
And that, but it's just, it's interesting to me that, like, the world is broken in such an interesting, I guess maybe broken in such an interesting way that, like, we won't ever get, like you said, that hoping that people will understand good thinking and deny bad thinking is, like, that's hoping for heaven on earth, I suppose. Like, that'd be, they're like, because I mean, literally casting aside, paying attention to the good thing and not paying attention to the bad thing. Like, that's literally what we might say,
But
yeah.
It's the materialism. This is why I like the materialism frame, because it's infected the church and the believers. And when materialism affects a believer, then their faith becomes corrupted, right? But it appears externally.
I see that, because the gospel that I'm beginning to understand is different than the gospel I was raised with, and I'm starting to see how it's different than, because that was always my original intent, even from the time I was a child, is that, like, why, when the disciples and the apostles were telling the gospel story, or were witnessing in that, why were they having these mass conversions, and my my church is constantly bringing in evangelist after evangelist or pastor after pastor, and we're going to have these, what do they call them?
Revival.
Revival. Thank you. Sorry, I cannot think of the word. It was like, we're going to have a revival in Cortez. And I was ready. I was expecting it. We prayed real hard. Like, it should have showed up, like as a kid. It was like, this summer, man, everybody, this is the thing we're always been hoping for. Like, this summer, everybody at Cortez is going to become a Christian. I just know it. And then we'd have another one. And it was like, or we'd have, go to camp and we'd have the campfire and, everybody would, keep every eye closed and bow your heads. And if you want to be a Christian, raise your hand and nobody look around. So your first act as a Christian is going in total secrecy, which is like super weird. But anyways, these are all Protestant things in that, but it's just, very common in that, but it just is, I don't know. Like I said, it's just different. I'm recognizing that there's a different Christianity at play in the world, and I don't know. It's just like I said. I had a week where I had a very long conversation with my dad, and I finally came to the realization we're not talking about the same scriptures and that.
Right.
And,
well, I don't like the word Christianity at all anymore. I was talking to my good friend Jesse from Australia last night, actually. And I laid out this whole case because I listened to this Burn Power PVK video. And I was like, man, my problem now is, and I think Burn and PVK were right about what they were talking about. They weren't talking about this, but like the Orthodox really follow the pattern of Protestantism and splitting because the Orthodox denominations are built on culture. And so you can't have Orthodox in America because we've got 8 different cultures in the
I've always thought of that was something that when I was investigating the Orthodox Church, that was okay. So I think his name was the Bible Answer Man, Frank Hanegraaff. He became or was it Scott Hahn? Scott Hahn may have been the one that made the comment. So when he was converting from Protestantism, he originally, like a lot of us, thought Eastern Orthodoxy, but upon visiting a Greek or Russian Orthodox church, he quickly realized, I'm not this Russian and I'm not this Greek. Like there's a lot of really Greek things going on and I don't recognize it.
Right.
And so he became, and that's when he started moving towards the Roman Catholic Church. At least I believe that was Scott Hahn's story.
Right, but that's the pattern of the splitting. And that's the pattern of the rejection of hierarchy. And the new thesis I've been battling around in my head, which is I'm not sure about any of this, the low certainty, is that these intermediate hierarchical structures that stop sort of too early, right? They don't have a penultimate pointer. They collapse. And so what you see in the strictly Protestant, not the Catholics, because they don't, the Orthodox maybe, but not to the extent that the Protestant denominations have. Christianity is just a belief in Christ. That's all they share. The problem is they have a different theology and they have a different belief of what Christ is. And so because they don't have a proper, we'll say, 3-point relationship or 3-system relationship, Trinitarian relationship with the feminine role archetype, right? What they end up with is they end up with Christ as the Father and they can't resolve it. And that becomes a theological issue. They throw out the Holy Spirit.
I freaking hate it when you do this, Mark.
Well, and that was
when you just figure theology out without having read any of it. It's awful. When I was in seminary, I had a professor who was involved in very high-level ecumenical dialogue. So this is nerds talking to nerds, right?
Yeah.
He did it with the Reformed, and he did it with the Lutherans. And he had studied Martin Luther very closely. And he said that Martin Luther had a functionally docetic Christology. What does that mean? Docetism was this idea that Jesus only appeared to be human. He didn't actually possess a human nature. Now, Martin Luther would have affirmed Chalcedonian orthodoxy. That wasn't the question. The question was, how did the human nature of Christ function in Martin Luther? And I have this all on the authority of Dr. Washburn, that the human nature of Christ didn't do anything in Martin Luther's soteriology. It was only the divinity. It's like the human nature was just like a mask for the divine nature of Christ. Whereas you go to Thomas Aquinas says it was the created charity in the heart of Christ that was the formal cause, right? The pattern of our redemption, the created charity in the heart of Christ, right? So it's the human nature of Christ was the proper conjoined instrument of the divinity through which our salvation was affected. And if we don't understand Christ in his incarnation, we've got zero chance of understanding the Trinity and how the Father and the Son are different, because the Father sends the Son and the Son is sent.
Right. Well, and he's manifest in from a purely human vessel. Right.
Yes, through the humanity of Christ. Yes.
Right. And because he puts together the divine feminine archetype of Mary and the divine masculine archetype of the Father, right, and points to it in a way that you can relate to because he was here the way you're here in some sense. Without that, you're basically completely screwed. Like, you're completely screwed. Now, you may not see it right away, but I think the reason why Protestantism is failing and why it fails differently in Europe and the United States is actually Europe's in a lot more trouble than we are. They just haven't seen it yet. But it's because of the rise of this noticing that, we need the divine feminine archetype. And so when you have broken motherhood, single moms, right, broken families, just people going crazy, right? Moms in particular, or dads, right? And you don't have a proper archetype to point to for that. You have nothing to fall back on. In other words, like, you got one mom. Well, if you don't have a divine mother or a divine archetype to point to for mom, and you lose your mom, you're in a lot of trouble. And the way you're going to try to redeem that or save that, not that that's the thing that you can do, because you can't, you're a human, is you're going to come up with either sophiology, which is wisdom as the feminine archetype, right? Or you're going to come up with beauty as the feminine archetype, because beauty and femininity are associated, right? And there might be others, but those are the two big ones right now. You see that beauty will save the world, wisdom will save the world. And those are very Protestant ideas. They're coming out of, some of them have maybe converted from Protestantism to Orthodoxy, but those are very Protestant ideas, but they come from the fact that they don't have the feminine archetype, so they're recreating it as wisdom or as beauty as such, or whatever. They're reinventing Mary because they didn't have Mary, and they're correctly diagnosing the problem and coming up with a poor implementation. When you can always argue the poor implementation is better than nothing, maybe, or maybe it's just a trick from our favorite trickster who destroys us all. I don't know. Could be.
Well, speaking of destruction, I'm going to destroy this live stream.
Oh no!
Because of the time, I must also destroy my active conscious experience by going to sleep. So, Castle Adams, great to have you on.
Thank you.
Josh, great to see you again. Mark, as always, my faithful companion here on these Sunday nights. And good night and God bless you all.
Thank you. You too.
Adios.